Hey, Matthew, welcome to the Open Door Sisterhood. Are,
Thank you.
are you
So great to join you
surprised?
guys.
Surprised to be welcomed into the sisterhood?
It's a unique experience, I guess, but glad to be here. Happy to contribute.
Well, you are used to, I mean, you and I know each other from a sisterhood of types.
Yeah.
We worked together at MOPS International. So you worked for a long time talking about how to communicate to women and moms, especially, and you didn't quite fit the mold there for the target audience, but you understand what it means to reach a specific audience for a purpose, on purpose, and that is why we are bringing you here today. You just started a new venture out on your own. So why don't you give us the 1 minute version of what you've been doing professionally since you and I worked together a few years ago at MOPS and what you're doing now?
Sure. Yeah, Mops was actually the first place where I really was challenged to like get in the head of a new audience, because when you're talking about branding, when you're talking about marketing, like, you got to get your audience. And so that was really my first big challenge, to be sort of immersed in a world that I knew virtually nothing about. And just had to figure it out. And so, yeah, I think that actually paved the way for me for a lot of my success in my career, is like understanding what people want and need, and then figuring out the content and the messaging and all that kind of stuff to get in front of them. So after MOPS, I went on to work for another a big nonprofit, United Way. And then sort of, as I continued to just gain momentum with my career, I sort of wanted to shift from that nonprofit side into helping clients. So I went into the agency world and worked for an agency that was really focused on mission-driven businesses and causes and policy, public policy, and stuff like that. And I built some ways to engage with audiences and sort of drive engagement up a spectrum that then I wanted to challenge myself and see how I could translate that to business. And instead of like getting people to, call in about something or sign a petition, I wanted to turn that into getting people to, explore a product and buy a product. And so I left that agency and went to a B2B, so a business to business ad agency that was really focused on, big Fortune 100 companies and driving engagement and pipeline revenue for them. So yeah, continue to do that there. And then as sort of, all the learnings that I had, I took into Transamerica. It's a big financial services company. I was leading content and working on the brand strategy team there. And yeah, so now I've decided to take all that I've learned, everything about branding, everything about content marketing, and take it into my own practice. And so, yeah, my company is called If This Then Creative. We're mostly a B2B agency, but we focus on branding and content marketing to help both business owners and marketing leaders just see better results from their marketing, instead of just doing some marketing and asking the question, did that work? Really helping them figure out how to do it more strategically and be able to show numbers that said, yes, this worked, and here's why.
Right. We want those numbers because
Exactly.
then it shows that it's working, that it's doing something. So let's start at the very beginning. Can you just give us an overview of what is branding and why is it important for us to be thinking about it?
Yeah, that's a really big question, and I'm
Mhm.
sure every person that you ask might have a slightly different answer. But as I was sort of thinking about this and preparing for this, about talking to you guys, I was like, what, like, really at the root level, what are we talking about here? When you're talking about branding, you're talking about creating a personality for a business, because you have an entity that's not a human, but you need to humanize it. So branding really helps you humanize a company. And then additionally with that, it helps you communicate what you do in a memorable way, because there's a lot of exposure that people are getting to all kinds of information and advertising and all kinds of brands. And the key thing that you want to do is stand out. So the way I would think about this really is like, think about yourself as a person. Like, the people who like you, the people who love you, they don't really like you and love you because you're efficient at what you do or you're good at what you do. They love you for who you are, and I would say even more specifically, who you are to them. So you sort of want to take that and turn that to your company, right? So what do you represent? How does who you are make them feel? And so I think branding, in a slightly artificial way, because it's not, a brand is not a human, a company is not a human, but in a little bit of an artificial way, you can start to get at that, to say, here's what we represent, here's who we are, and here's how we make people feel. So the key thing there is creating an experience that goes beyond just the product of the solution that you have, And a lot of times when people think about branding, they think about, okay, let's make a new logo for the business. But yeah, that's a great start, right? You want a logo, you want imagery that's gonna connect with your audience, but you got to go beyond that. You have to create a connection with your audience that goes beyond that. So when we're really thinking about, okay, so why is that important? Why do you need to have branding? And I think it really gets back to that you're connecting with prospects and customers on this level that's beyond just rational. You want to connect with them emotionally. You even want to have, in a positive way, like a visceral or even like a subconscious level of connection with them, to where, when someone sees your brand, they see the thing and then they feel a thing, right? And I think if you're really doing good branding, that they'll start to make that connection, and that feeling they have will be a positive one, because you want them to see your brand, see your content, whatever you're putting out there, and be like, oh yeah, I like these guys.
Yeah,
and
like
so
when I walk into Target, that's how I feel when I walk into
exactly.
Target.
Yeah, you get the warm fuzzy, it connects with you. It's like, oh, this is home. That's a great example too, because you think of how many things you get at Target that are then in your home. And so, yeah, you start to make this connection between home and where I belong with Target. That's a great place if you have somebody in the store and they feel like that's where they belong, so that's a great example.
So as we're looking at, people who are trying to either create or actually strengthen their brand, they may have had a brand for a while and they're wanting to strengthen it, and they realize I may need to hit refresh on this brand. What questions should people be asking as they're going through that process?
Yeah, I think that's key, to always be looking at, how what you're putting out there is being perceived and how it's coming across. And as you sort of expand it and dig into it, I think you always need to be thinking about what you do and what you offer, for sure. But I think a big part of the brand is what are you aspiring to be? So be asking yourself that question: what am I aspiring to be? And is what I'm putting out into the world reflective of that? So not only do you need to be thinking about what your business is about, and if you're thinking about what it's about, you're thinking about, we do X for this audience, right? So that's sort of the basics of business. Like, you need to know what you do for what audience. But then I think with branding, you want to take that one step further. Then you want to ask, because why? So we do X for whom, because why? And so sort of three questions that can really, that why question is tough. It's tough to sort of get to that, but just to sort of scratch the surface on that a little bit, I think, some questions that you can ask yourself are, what's the root problem you solve for customers or clients? So, when somebody works with you, when somebody engages your services, or buys your product or whatever, what are you solving for them? Not only on just a practical level, but beyond that, what are you solving for them? And then I think the key part for us to think about as individuals and as companies representing our brand, we have to always consider, what's our motivation to solve these problems for customers? Of course, we want to make money, right? But beyond that, what is your motivation that's really driving you to do that? And then in addition, you can ask yourself, why do you believe you have the best solution to solve that problem for that customer or for that client? So with those questions, you can sort of start to get to the root of why you're doing what you're doing, and then thinking how you can communicate to that to your audience. I think the other thing too that I always push with clients that I work with, is really figuring out your unique value proposition. So if that's not something that you've done, I think that's a really important thing, as a foundation for your business and being successful there. But then also, if you get that set, then you can move that into a branding perspective to just think through these things. A few questions there. Going back to that, what does our end user need from us? Because a lot of time businesses are thinking about, what are we going to put out there and how do we sell it? Flip that on its head and ask yourself, what is our ideal customer and what does our ideal client need from us? And then I think another thing to think about is, what would motivate them to engage you for that service, to buy your product or whatever. What's their motivation to work with you, and then start to figure out why. And once you do that, you can start to get some insights that can help you with how you're branding and how you're marketing. And I think another key question, people don't necessarily always like to ask this one, but in situations, you're not always going to close every deal. You're not always going to, get everybody to engage with you that you want. So I think another thing that's important to think about within your target audience, what is their objection, or what are their objections to working with you, to engaging your services, to buying your product? And really just thinking through, okay, here's a few things that they might be hesitant about, or they might be curious about, or scared about, or whatever. And then figuring out ways that you can sort of answer those, respond to those and how you're setting yourself up.
Can you give a couple of, maybe even one example of how someone has done that well?
I mean, I think about MailChimp. I mean, like that's, I know that's a little obscure answer, but I just actually recently listened to How I Built This podcast with MailChimp. And that's one of the things that they do very well. I think they set themselves apart, and they really set out to say, they have great branding, by the way. I mean, like they're an email company, and it's like, the monkey, it's got the chimp, it's got the logo, so it's like memorable and all that kind of stuff. But I think the thing that they do is like, when you go to their website, or when you get any of the messages from them, they just light up like, we know you're trying to do XYZ, and here's how we help you get it done. So I think that's a pretty good example of a company that just sets you up for success by basically like telling you what problems they know you have before you might even know them. And the thing that they've done as well too, as they've grown their brand and grown their business, is they know that you start with these problems, but then once you address those and you start to grow, you're going to have these other problems, and then they have additional products, and they have additional things that they can sell to you to help you address those problems as well. So that's one right off the top of my head that I think is probably a pretty good example of that.
Yeah, I agree. So how do you make sure that your brand reflects your core values? Because sometimes I think there can be a little bit of a disconnect there. Like you may have core values, but it may not be reflected in your brand. Like, so how do you mix those?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, like you're saying, I think the first thing is you really need to clearly define those values. And I think, when we're talking about something obscure like values, we can also just often put out these sort of big ideas, but like, what does that mean? For instance, I know this one might be a little bit politically charged, but when you talk about something like family values, that gets thrown around a lot of ways. It can mean a lot of different things. It can be very politically loaded. It can be not politically loaded. So, I mean, that's a good example of like, okay, like dive down into what does that mean? What do you mean by that? So I think, yeah, get very specific and applicable rather than staying on that sort of like vague and like feeling based level. So, I mean, like a couple examples of that would be like, if sustainability is sort of key for your brand or your company, like environmental sustainability, you need to do it in your business and then show how you're doing it in your branding with stories, content, pushing out via social, on your website, all these different places. But I think that's key. Like you have to do the thing, you have to be the thing before you show people that you are the thing. Another example of that would be innovation. Working with a lot of tech clients, I see this all the time. Everybody talks about how they're innovative, and they just love to use that word. We're an innovative company. We're innovating this. We're innovating that. But then they don't really give solid examples. So I think if you claim that, if you have that value and you're claiming that value, you have to show it. You have to be developing solutions to problems in a new way, in a different way. So it's really, you want to live the value that you have first, and then you talk about it. And then when you're talking about it, that's when it really becomes the brand. So, the warning I would have, I guess, is, don't try to push forward a value that you're not actually embodying first. So I think that can help address that disconnect that you're talking about, is to do it and live it and then talk about it. Don't try to talk about it first, then do it,
Mm-hmm. That's really good. And I think for the women watching this, that I'm sure will resonate too, because often we are talking about things that are important to us, but it's that personal integrity. Are we living it out?
Right.
Especially if we have a personal brand, are we demonstrating this in our own life? But then when we talk about how we are, it is giving people handholds on, okay, this is what that value looks like. If she's doing it this way, that would be a good way for me to try. So
exactly.
I think
yeah, to add to that, yeah, I think, and I think especially with a personal brand situation, being honest about that, saying like, I value this and this is hard. This is tough to continually do this, we believe in X, we work to live to fulfill X. And in doing so, that's a challenge. And I think, if you talk about that, then you're bringing like, I mean, I almost hate to even use this word, but you're bringing in that sort of authentic voice and to say like, hey, I'm a human, who doesn't get everything right every time. So I think that's a great point.
So as we're thinking about our end user, I mean, you've touched a little bit on how we need to keep that person in mind as we're developing our brand. But how much should we tailor or adapt to meet that person's needs? And again, that gets to that kind of that integrity of who we are and what we're putting out there. How much do we tailor to the person that we are trying to reach?
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal question. If you're talking about doing good business, that customer centricity is essential. Like if you're not customer centric, if you're not thinking about their problems, if you're not thinking about tailoring what you do to what they need, I don't think you're going to be very successful as a business. And almost everyone forgets about that. I've worked for big corporations, I've worked with small clients, and everybody likes to start talking about here's what we offer rather than here's how we solve your problems. So in that way, you're really thinking about solutions over products. You're thinking about function over the features, but that's more on the business side. If you're, when we're talking about brand, it's a little different because, I feel like sort of the underlying current of what you're asking is like how much should we, and should we tailor to be exactly what we want, what we think that people want us to be? And my answer would be no. I think your business should meet your customer needs and preference, but your brand, I think, it's the opportunity to challenge those. If you're going to stand out in whatever industry you're in, you can't look like everybody else. You can't do what's expected all the time. So I think, that's a place with personal branding and with businesses. Your brand is a place where you can sort of challenge a little bit. And depending on, the scale that you're working with, even for personal branding, you can see how people respond to it and sort of adapt to it. But yeah, I think your business is where you're really focused on serving those needs of your client and really addressing those pain points, one-to-one. With your brand, I think it's more about that motivational aspect, it's that aspirational aspect, and really, be able to challenge a little bit there. Because if you go and research, every brand that does X, and then you're like, okay, I'm just going to be in the median here of what all these brands are saying and doing, then you're just going to, you're not going to stand out. You're going to have no differentiation. So I think the brand is a little bit of opportunity to push the envelope.
That's a great point. So when we're looking at, our why we're doing what we're doing, which I know that sounds really obvious, but actually it's not, because so much of the time we are just operating at this more surface level and not thinking about our why. Why are we doing what we're doing, and how is that impacting how we're making this decision? And it's a strange thing because we almost go on autopilot once we've done the work of, okay, well, that's our why, but that was our why, 2 years ago when we developed it, but we don't really use it to fuel the decisions that we're making today, 2 years later. And so, I mean, why is it, I guess, important, and is it important for us to consider our why we're doing what we're doing as we're continuing to develop our brand, and how does that impact our branding when we do that?
Yeah, for sure. The why is really the core of your identity. It's I mean, the way that I like to think about it, it's the engine driving your story, and it needs to be compelling. And the interesting thing I found, whether it's like coaches or people selling products, or people that are doing consulting, or people selling business services or whatever, pretty much every time I've sort of had that conversation with a business owner or a marketing leader, the why is usually pretty compelling. Usually they have some experience that they've had at some point that made them passionate. I mean, passionate might be overstated, in some cases it might be passion. In other cases that, make them curious and interested, and it makes them want to be able to help people in a certain space. And so I think, a lot of times we think that uncovering the why is really this big scary thing, and it's not. It's just like, it's really just like, why do you get out of bed in the morning? Why do you go do this thing? And hopefully it's more than just, I want to make money, So, that's the good news, I guess, is that I've found there's usually a good why there. I think, to think about how you get there, think about like, what was the inspiration for me to do this thing that I'm doing? What was behind it? What I mean, even in a job that you're working, if you're working for another company, what is your inspiration there? What is driving you to do that? If it's your own business, if it's your own consulting, if it's your own coaching, that question should be even easier to answer. And I think the other point that you made is, we can set the why, and then we're off to the races. And then a year and a half later or 2 years later, we're just sort of doing our business, and we're like, oh yeah, I forgot, that's what we're doing. That's why we're doing this. And I think the, you know, important thing there is to think, you know, the why isn't a set thing. It's evolutionary. You know, you can and should continue to evolve it over time, because, you know, like when you start out, you might have a very specific why and a specific motivation, and that might, you know, change as you grow, or as you get more into a niche, you know, whatever way that you go with your business. I think it's very important to revisit that, and continually ask yourself, why am I doing this today? You know, I know why I started this. Why am I still doing it? And then, you know, that's asking that question is even a good place to where you can say, do I need to change the trajectory that I'm on? Because if I'm not enjoying it, and if I'm not doing it for reasons similar to why I started it, you know, we need to shift something up here and get back to like why we do this. Because I think that's what, you know, that's why you get out of bed in the morning. That's what makes you come across as engaging, and you know, being someone that people want to work with.
And that gets to the tailoring too, to the client, right? Like you find, oh, people are really responding to this part of what I'm offering. And so maybe this is the place where I need to expand, because
Right.
I have something unique here. My voice here is resonating with people.
Yes.
And so I think for people too, with a personal brand, that can make a lot of impact to say, okay, where are people really resonating, and why don't I see what else I can do in this space?
Yes. I
So it's
love
that
that.
constant reevaluation of serving the people on the end, and how can I be that unique offering in that space? Okay, I know we're running out
Exactly.
of time, but if you have any quick knowledge for us about word choice or visual elements, and what how those impact branding, you can throw them our direction.
Yeah. So I think, just to touch on the visual element really quickly, I think that's huge. I think it's really important. I think it can communicate things that nothing that you say can, you know, and it can sort of create that memorable experience that you have with the brand. But I think, you know, I have, you know, I'll skip over the examples that I was thinking about, because we are a little bit short on time. But I think, you know, in terms of getting that right, I think really, I mean, I hate to say this, but really, it's like the way to approach that is hiring a professional. Get somebody who's really good at that kind of stuff, a graphic designer who can think through your visual identity, your logos. And I think the key thing when it comes to that is someone who can ask the right questions without asking you directly what you want your brand to look like. You know, I think a good thing to always do is like pull inspiration. If you see something, screenshot it and throw it in a folder. It's like, ooh, I like how this looks. You know, I like how this company's doing this. I love how this coach is doing this. I love how this person is doing this. So sort of make a collection of what you like. So that's something that you can share. But then also, like, you have to think about, why does that person's brand look that way? Why does this person's company brand look that way? And think about that kind of stuff. So, you know, the key thing with the visuals, I would say, thinking about your unique value proposition, and exactly what you were just saying about what you offer that other people don't, or what resonates with what you do, is trying to pull that as a feeling that comes into, you know, the look and feel of what you're creating. In terms of word choice, you know, that's huge. I think the most important thing that you can really do is not only establish that tone and voice that you're going to have, but then carry it through everything you do, right? So if your brand, if your personal brand, if your business, if you're this clever and playful type person, or this clever and playful type tone of voice, you need to do that everywhere. You know, is it more empathetic and heartfelt? If so, that needs to be everywhere. If maybe you're straightforward, no nonsense, here's the solutions I provide, you know, that needs to be everywhere. Like, not just on your webpage. It needs to be on your website. It needs to be in your emails. It needs to be sort of an underlying, you know, thing that's in all the content that you put out. Everywhere you show up, you need to have that same tone of voice. So I think getting that right, and then making sure you're carrying that out across everything you're doing is important. It's hard to do. I'm not gonna lie, like, really nailing that tone that works and your audience likes, and that you like, this representative view, it's hard to do. But if you do it, and once you find it, I think it'd be very successful to sort of set you apart. So I think the other key thing with your branding that's important and word choice is sort of, what are your key messages? You know, whether you work with somebody to help them help you discover this, or whether you just sit down and say, what are the key things that I want to talk about with what I offer, with what I do? And so really working at key messages where you have very strong talking points in terms of, here's what we offer, these address these pain points for our audience, you know, and then here's the key solutions that we have. Here's some audience objections. That's what I was talking about earlier, thinking about those and then coming up with proof points to really support those. So really, you know, whether you want to call them pillars, key messages, whatever, if you have those established, you can incorporate your tone and your voice into those, and then you can use those almost like cut and paste, you know, to throw them into different things that you're sending out. And also too, just to go back whenever you have a new thing that you're talking about, go back to those key messages and say, am I saying the things that reflect who I am and who we are, even as we sort of like expand into this new thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, all of that, what you just said will take hours and hours, right? Like people really have to do the work. They have to
Yeah.
do the work of breaking all those down and continually doing that, not just a one time, but like you said, revisiting it. So if people want to get your help and work with you, where can they go to do that?
Sure. Yeah, you can find my agency website at ifthisthencreative.com. Or you can just look me up on LinkedIn. My name is Matthew Vermillion. You know, it's spelled like it sounds, Vermillion. Yeah, find me on there. Be happy to connect. You know, be happy to share any insights I have, answer any questions that you have. Yeah, happy to help. So excited I could join you guys and talk to you guys about this. I hope it's helpful to you guys that are listening to this, and hope you got something out of it.
Great.
Thank you,
Well,
Matthew.
thanks so much, Matthew. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.